Hello students, this is your review for the exam on Unit 3. Okay, first of all, the governor, if he does not want a bill to become law, he has to veto it. If he doesn't veto it, after 10 days after he's gotten it, it becomes law. So he's got to veto it if he doesn't like it. Okay, in even-numbered years, state legislators get a grand total of $7,200 in pay. So it's not exactly where you want to go to build your your financial career. Okay. Impeachment is a formal charge by the House of Representatives, and the legislatives, it's an exercise of the legislature's judicial power. The legislature normally exercises legislative power to propose and laws, but they exercise the judicial power when it comes to impeachment. And of course, the House impeaches, and the Senate would have to try and convict and remove the person from office. Okay, the legislature has direct and supervisory powers that include review of each state agencies every 12 years. It's called the Sunset Commission. Every 12 years, each state agency has to be reviewed to see if, first of all, if it's still needed, and if it is, if it's doing a good job. And if the Sunset Committee or Commission does not think it's doing a good job or is not needed, they tell the legislature, and the legislature may decide to abolish it or not fund it any longer. Okay. Okay, of course, bills, which are proposed laws, have to be introduced into the legislature by a member of the legislature, either a representative or a senator. But anybody can write the bill, and very often they do. Lobbying groups write bills that they would like to see become law, but they cannot introduce them themselves. They have to go to a member of the House of Representatives or a member of the Senate in order to get introduced. But anybody can write a bill. Okay, the term pigeonhole means that the bill is set aside before it's even considered in committee. It's pigeonholed, so it's not going to be talked about or considered by the committee. As in the U.S. Congress, the purpose of a conference committee is to reconcile differences between a bill that was passed in the House and a similar but not exactly the same bill that was passed in the Senate. They have to get together and come up with a compromise bill, which has to be word for word, letter to letter, comma by comma, exactly the same. And then it's repassed, or it's passed by both houses of the legislature and then sent to the governor. In Texas, a governor's post-adjournment veto is a very significant power. As you know, the legislature can only meet for 140 days in odd-numbered years. They cannot extend their term of session on their own. Only the governor can do that by calling a special session. So if a bill has been sent to the governor, maybe at the end of the legislative session, and that's when most bills are sent to the governor, because the legislature puts off getting things done until the last minute, like all of us do sometimes. But if they send bills to the governor, kind of at the last minute, then the governor has 10 days to sign it, and during that 10 days, if he decides to veto it, and the legislature's time, 140 days in the session, has already expired, then they've already turned out the lights and gone home. So they cannot veto the bill or they cannot override the governor's veto of the bill because they're not there anymore. So it's called a post-adjournment veto, and it means that that there's no way that the legislature can override the governor's veto because they're not there anymore. The Comptroller of Public Accounts has a very important job with respect to the legislature. The Comptroller, when a legislature is about to convene, the Comptroller presents what's called a biannual budget, revenue estimate, a biannual revenue estimate, BRE, biannual revenue estimate. And this is how much money the Comptroller thinks that the state is going to take in during the next 2 years. And so the Comptroller presents this to the legislature as their allowance, as their budget, that, hey, you can't spend more money than this because the state constitution prohibits the legislature from spending more money than they take in. If for some reason there's an overrun of expenses as the 2 years goes by, then the state can borrow some money. They can borrow up to 5% of their budget, but they have to pay their bills. They cannot run a deficit. Okay, the legislative districts in Texas are drawn by the state legislature. The state legislature draws all of the legislative districts and all the senatorial districts, plus all of the congressional districts in the state of Texas. They do this normally after the census. There's a census of the United States every 10 years, and they normally do redistricting after the census. In fact, they really have to do it at that time. They could do it anytime they want. They can do districting. And of course, since they do the districting, then whichever party controls the state legislature also controls the redistricting process, and they can engage in the process known as gerrymandering, which is the practice of drawing districts in such a way that it favors your political party by adjusting the boundaries. The courts has set forth several rules about that. They said, okay, that all the districts have to be the same size in population. You cannot have one district, whether it's a Texas representative district or Texas senatorial district or a U.S. congressional district. You can't have one district that has double the number that some other district has. You can't do that because the people in that bigger district, their vote is watered down. Their vote is not as important as the votes in the smaller districts. So the courts have said, yeah, you got to draw the districts the same size population-wise, within a margin of error. And secondly, they have to be contiguous. You can't have island districts. You can't have one part of a district all by itself in one part of the county or the state, and another part of the district as an island in some other part of the county or the state. Can't do that. And so the districts have to be contiguous. They have to be, in one. A district has to be, one land mass, and they have to be compact. They cannot, take on the looks of a snake or a salamander. That's where the word gerrymander came from. It's from a governor of Massachusetts back in the early 1800s, who discovered this way of influencing the legislature by drawing districts. And his name was Eldridge Gerry, Gerry. And so at one point he drew a district that looked like a big lizard or salamander. And so his critics said, well, it's not a salamander, it's a gerrymander or a gerrymander. So that's where we got the word gerrymander or gerrymander. Okay. But the legislature draws the districts, and if they draw them in a way that offends the Congress or the Constitution, if they discriminate against racial minorities, or even if they favor racial minorities, then they can be taken to court, and they usually are taken to court and in Texas, and there are complaints that the districting was unfair. Okay. The legislature cannot overturn a post-adjournment veto simply because they're no longer in session. They're not there. They've already turned out the lights and gone home. Okay, the media is important in the legislative process because it tends to focus on certain issues, and those issues then become the topic of conversation in the within the public in general and within the legislative bodies. And this is true both at the state level and at the congressional level and even at the presidential level. So if the media is running a lot of stories on a particular subject, then those stories are the ones that get talked about, and they become the focus. Okay, the governor has some appointed power. He or she can use that appointed power to reward their supporters or to recruit good people for various jobs. The governor in Texas appoints approximately 3,000 members of commissions or boards or what have you. Boards of trustees of all the state-supported universities are nominated by the governor and confirmed by the Senate of the state. And the governor also appoints the members of commissions like the Texas Workforce Commission, Texas Insurance Board, that sort of thing. And so those are very important. Rick Perry was the longest serving governor of Texas. So during his terms of office, which totaled 14 years, he appointed virtually every one of those 3,000 members because of turnovers and people retiring and people whose terms had expired. Maybe they were appointed by a previous governor, but their terms were expiring. So Governor Perry then renewed them, and so he got credit for a new appointment. Okay, the governor does have what's called a line item veto, where he can, in some cases, strike out a particular portion of an appropriations bill and veto that portion, but okay the rest of the bill. It's called a line item veto. But the governor can only exercise that on certain items, only on specific provisions or lines of appropriation bills. So he can't use that power for any other vetoing any other portion of an appropriations bill, but only certain lines. Okay, the legislative budget is the one that gets the attention. The governor can present a budget himself or herself, but the legislative budget is formulated by a group called the Legislative Budget Board. Now, the Legislative Budget Board, also known as the LBB, is chaired by the Lieutenant Governor. The Lieutenant Governor appoints several senators to serve on the board, and also the Speaker of the House appoints certain representatives, principally the chair people of the Senate and House Finance Committees and Appropriations Committee, plus a few other senators and a few other representatives. It's a small group, but they're the people who write the budget. They are the ones who decide basically who gets the money, what agencies get the most money, and which agencies don't. It's called the Legislative Budget Board. Now, before any budget can or any bill can be passed, the budget board has to come up with a proposal, and then it has to be voted on by both houses of the legislature. But before it's sent to the governor, it has to be approved by the Comptroller of Public Accounts in Texas. The Comptroller has to certify that he or she thinks or projects that there will be sufficient revenue to pay for whatever the budget proposes. So it has to have the stamp of approval of the Comptroller to say, yeah, I think we're going to have enough money come in during the next 2 years to pay for this. And if the Comptroller says, no, I think that you're going to come up short, then the Legislative Budget Board has to go back to work and do some trimming. The only governor who was ever impeached and actually removed from from office was a person named Jim Ferguson, back in the 1920s. And the consequence of that was that the Lieutenant Governor, William P. Hobby, became governor because the Governor, James Ferguson, was impeached and convicted and removed from office. And one of the first things that William P. Hobby did was call a special session of the legislature for the purpose of ratifying the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which was the amendment that extended the right to vote or recognized the right to vote by women. And Texas was the first state in the South to do that, and the fifth state nationwide to do that. And of course, the power of appointment is the governor's most important executive power. His power to appoint these 3,000 members of various boards and commissions in the state. Also, he can appoint judges when there is a vacancy in a court due to the resignation of a judge or the death of a judge, or if a judge gets impeached and removed from office, which happens very seldom. The governor appoints an interim judge until the next election. But those appointments are very, very important because those appointees who become temporary judges, they almost always win the election when the election comes around, because they are people who probably have practiced in that court, and once they've been appointed temporary judge or interim judge, they've already tried on the black robe and it fits, and they know all the lawyers. The lawyers who practice in that court all know this new judge, and they contribute to his or her re-election campaign or election campaign, and so they almost always win the election. So those appointments, those judicial appointments, are very, very important. Okay. The Constitution establishes what's called a plural executive. That means that the heads of the various departments in the executive branch of the government all run for office on their own. They are not appointed by the governor. They don't run in tandem or side by side with the governor, although they often do, because if they are if the candidates are members of the same political party, they tend to campaign together and work together, but they don't have to. It's not like the federal election where the president and vice president run as a ticket. That doesn't happen in Texas. So it's called a plural executive, meaning that there is not just one chief executive, there are many executives. And this was established because of a fear of having too much power concentrated in the governor's office. This was a reaction to the Governor Davis in the 1870s. He was a post-Reconstruction or post-Civil War Reconstruction justice and governor. And he was very harsh, and people didn't like him. In fact, it caused people to decide to write a new constitution in 1876. And in that new constitution, they greatly limited the powers of the governor. Okay, the members of the Plural Executive, they are all elected by the people except for one. That is the Secretary of State. Secretary of State is appointed directly by the governor, and it's usually a political plum that he appoints some friend of his or some supporter or contributor or what have you, because it's basically a ceremonial office. Secretary of State is not like the Secretary of State of the United States, who travels all around the world to foreign countries. Secretary of State essentially is like the record keeper of the state of Texas. If you want to set up a corporation or become a notary public, then that's the office that you deal with. The Texas Department of Insurance regulates the insurance market in Texas, and they are appointed by the governor. That's one of his or her appointments. The collection of taxes is the job of the Comptroller of Public Accounts. That's where the money goes, and the Comptroller has the job of making sure that it is accredited to the right accounts, because there are I think it's about 3,000 different accounts that handle the money coming in, because you have federal money coming in, you have money coming in for health care, for education, that's earmarked for those. You have money coming in from the royalties, from the oil leases. You have all kinds of different sources of money coming in, and so it has to be allocated to the correct accounts, and that's the job of the Comptroller. Okay, the Supreme Court of Texas handles civil cases, whereas the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals obviously handles the criminal cases. And they have the ability, the authority, courts of appeals have the authority to review the actions of lower courts. They are not trial courts. They don't have trials and witnesses and juries and everything. Their job is to look at the record of cases in the civil courts and in the criminal courts to see if the law was followed, to see if there were mistakes made, to see if maybe evidence was admitted into the court that shouldn't have been, or maybe there was evidence that was not allowed in a case and it should have been allowed, and it was something that was important to the case and should have been allowed or should not have been allowed. And so that's the job of the appeal courts, to see if the law was followed. They don't retry the case. They simply see if there was a fair trial and if the law was followed. Okay, county judges are not, in most cases, actually judges per se. They are more they're more like administrators. County judges are kind of like a mayor for the county, because they preside over what's called a county commissioner's court, which is kind of like a city council, but it's for the county, so it's kind of called county commissioner's court, and the county judge presides over it. And if you get a case in Justice of the Peace Court, whether it's a civil case or a criminal case, and you don't like the outcome, then you would appeal to what's called the county court, the statutory county court. Municipal courts, city courts, they're mainly traffic courts. They handle other things, like if you are burning trash within the city limits, or you are shooting off fireworks in the city limits or something, and you get a ticket, then that's in municipal court. But they're mainly traffic court. They also handle civil cases, small claims, in the Justice of the Peace Court. That's where you find that Justice of the Peace Court, small claims, and civil law in general focuses on family relationships, obligations, and responsibilities like contracts. Somebody promises to paint your house, and you sign a contract and give them some money, and they don't paint it, then you sue them. You want your money back, whatever. And what you file, if you are filing in civil court, you file what's called a complaint. In other words, you're complaining. Well, I paid him to paint my house and he didn't do it, so that's my complaint. And then whoever you're suing can file what's called an answer. They say, oh no, I didn't paint the house because so and so. So that's would be an answer. And the most important judicial power of the governor is, as I mentioned before, the power to appoint judges when there's a vacancy on the court. Maybe the legislature creates a new court, so there's no judge. So some needs a judge, so the governor has to appoint the judge. And that's one of the most important powers of the governor, is to appoint judges. Okay. Texas eliminated straight ticket voting. I think in 2015. It went into effect in 2020. And you can no longer go in on the general election day, which is normally in November, and vote by pulling one lever or clicking on one box. Vote straight Democratic or straight Republican or straight Green Party or straight Libertarian Party or what have you. You can't do that. You can still vote a straight ticket, but you have to go down the ballot election by election to select your candidate of choice. And there's several reasons given why Texas did that. One was a concern that maybe some experienced judges were getting kicked out of office simply because they were, listed under the party that did not prevail in the election. But another argument was that, well, it was favoring the Democratic Party in Harris County and probably in some other counties also. There were a lot of Democratic judges elected around that time, around 2014 and 16 and 18. The county judge has political and administrative functions combined with some judicial functions, and that's true. Judicial functions would be sometimes the county judge, he or she has to approve something like if somebody wants to get married before they are of age, then the county judge may have to okay it. Okay, tort law. Tort is like when somebody has hurt or damaged another person in some way. It's called a tort, and it's a civil case. It's automobile accidents would be torts because somebody has damaged somebody else's property, their automobile, for example. They've had a wreck, and you have to decide whose fault it was and how much damage there was. So that would be a civil case, tort. Judicial elections in Texas are partisan. There's a Democrat and a Republican, sometimes also a Green Party, and our Libertarian candidate running for the position. So they are partisan. They are not nonpartisan. They are partisan. And the candidates are picked in the party primaries, just like candidates for other offices like governor and lieutenant governor. And only about 25% of all judges in Texas, district judges in Texas, are Latino, even though the population of Texas Latinos is around 40%, or getting very close to that. Only about 25% of all district judges in Texas are Latino. So you would say Latinos are underrepresented in the judiciary of district judges. The Texas Supreme Court today tends to favor defendants. Plaintiffs don't do well in the Supreme Court. Supreme Court tends to be very conservative and sort of pro-business, pro-defendant. Okay, if you want to get copies of your marriage license or death certificates or what have you, you would contact the county clerk where you're getting married. If you want to get married, get a marriage license, you can contact the county clerk, and you get a marriage license, then you go see a judge or a minister or a priest, what have you, and get married, and then after that person signs that you have been married, they return it to the county clerk, and it goes on record, and you can always get a copy, a certified copy of your marriage certificate. County commissioners' courts are composed of 4 county commissioners, and they are elected from single-member districts. That means that the county is divided 4 ways, and there's 1 commissioner elected from each one of those districts. A number of urban areas are home rule. If you have more than 5,000 people living within a city, then you can become what's called a home rule city. That means you can have your own charter, kind of like having your own constitution. You can decide what form of government you're going to have, if you're going to have, how many council members you're going to have, and whether you're going to have a strong mayor council form of government like Houston. Houston has a strong mayor council form of government. The mayor is a strong mayor. Most large cities, in fact, virtually all other major cities in Texas, have what's called a council manager form of government. In other words, the city council is elected, and there may be a mayor elected as well, but the mayor is largely ceremonial. The mayor goes out and cuts ribbons when there's a new library that's opened or what have you. But they don't really have much say-so in the actual running of the city. The council has hired a manager, just like anybody else gets hired. They interview candidates and pick somebody, usually somebody with a background in city management, or somebody who's a businessman or an attorney or something of that nature, and they are put in charge essentially of running the city. Although the council has to guide the manager, how they want the city run. It's actually the manager who handles the day-to-day business of the city. But as I said, Houston is different. Houston has a strong mayor system. If you don't have 5,000 people living in your city, you're called a general law city, which means you don't have a lot of discretion in how you run your city. You have to just go by the state law. if you if you were to try to reform city government so that it better represents the ethnic and racial diversity of your city, and with leadership that is more accountable to others or to voters, which of the following forms of government would you choose? Well, you choose probably a mayor-council form of government. For example, in Houston, it used to be that council people and even judges were elected countywide. The problem with that is they all tend to be the same. If the county is overwhelmingly white Anglo, then all of these officials tend to wind up being white Anglo, and there's very few African American or Latino people that win. So at one point, Houston decided, I think there were some court cases, and they had to decide to divide the city up into council districts. So Houston actually has 15 city council people. 10 of them are elected from individual districts. You have districts numbered A, B, District A, District B, District C, and so forth. There are 10 of those. And then there are 5 who are elected at large throughout the whole city. And of course, the mayor is elected at large throughout the city. Okay, the result of this is that you have more diversity on city council. You have African Americans who get elected. You have Latinos who get elected, etc. The most numerous form of government entity is something called the special district. Special districts are very, very numerous. School districts are special districts. Special districts means that it's a district, it's a geographic area, and there's a person or people elected from that geographic area for a special purpose. For example, Aldine ISD, that is a special purpose district. It's set up strictly to provide education to eligible people within that geographic area. It's not set up to do anything else. It does not regulate the quality of food in restaurants or what have you. It's simply set up to educate students within the geographic boundaries of Aldine ISD. And there are other specialty districts like Harris County Hospital District, Harris County Flood Control District, Harris County, sometimes called municipal utility districts, also known as MUDs, which provide utilities in subdivisions outside of the city limits. Those are all specialty districts, and there's more of them than cities or counties put together. There's a lot of those. For example, in Harris County, I believe there are about 20 different school districts. Of course, Houston Independent School District is the largest. I think probably Aldine ISD is second, and then you have Pasadena ISD and Spring ISD and Cy-Fair and so forth. You got about 20 of the school districts in Harris County. Okay, well, that concludes your review for the exam on Unit 3 of Texas Government. And the exam you can take at any time after the day of the review. You cannot take the exam before the day of the review. It's not open. But once we reach the day of review, then you can watch this video. You can watch it as many times as you want, and then you take the exam. You take it on your own, but it has to be on your own. It's the honor system. You cannot get assistance from another person or any other outside source. You can refer to your book, but you really won't have time because it is a timed exam. It's an hour and a half you have to take the exam. You have 50 questions. They are all multiple choice or true or false. And so good luck to you, and have a good day. Thank you.